Hey, I'm Christy. Thanks for joining us for MiWeek After the Show. There's a fight going on in progress here, so I'm just going to sit back and relax and let you guys listen to Stephen and Nolan as they tackle everything from extreme poverty, why people can't pay for college, and if Mary Barra's salary really impacts workers on the line. Discuss.
Yeah, I mean, no one's saying that the money that Mary Barra makes should be given to workers. The question is, what is the company making, and how is that money distributed among the people who work for it? And over 30 years, what we've seen is that growth in corporate profits, in CEO pay, in payouts to shareholders, they've gone up about 80% in the last 30 years. The pay for hourly workers over the same period of time has only gone up 7.2%. So what's happened is that the gap between those at the top and those at the bottom is widening even as the pool gets larger. And that's one of the problems. And no one's saying that you have to have government fix that. That should be a corporate imperative.
What do you think GM's profit margin is?
I'm not sure what their profit margin is.
You're talking exorbitant profits as if it's 20, 30%.
But
they struggle.
Well, but they don't.
In their best years,
they're struggling. But are the people at the top struggling?
Single digits. No, and we're always going to have a society where the people at the top do better. You talk about hourly wages.
But do better.
If you look at over 30 years and what's happened to people with skills and an education, and they have done far better than that. And in fact, they've absolutely kept pace with
not hourly pay has it. Hourly pay has it.
People with skills and education.
But you're talking about people who are moving up the ladder.
And we have been talking about for 30 years about the importance of getting skills and education in this new economy. This is not an equality gap. This is an education gap.
All right, so give me something big picture, please. Let's expand it.
Are you bored with this?
I'm not bored yet. I'm sitting back and I'm relaxing.
Well, but my point is, this is what the Pope's talking about. He's not talking about charity and people giving. I mean, that's always been, since the founding, that's been an excuse for awful behavior. When we enslaved African Americans in this country, one of the excuses was, well, you know, we're taking care of people. We take good care of them as their slaves on the farm.
Excuse?
Well, it was one of the excuses. I mean, there's a difference. Hold on.
Okay,
there's a distinction between policy and individual action. And policy drives what happens to most people most of the time. And so you need to fix policy when you have massive unfairness.
Last 7 years, what's happened to the equality gap? Bigger or smaller?
It's bigger.
And yet we've had massive redistribution programs, wealth transfer programs of the kind you advocate and the Pope
over the last 7 years,
and we have not.
What happened to corporate profits over the last 7 years? If you invested 100,
fortunately they've come.
Yeah,
they've come forward, and as they have the employment rate.
So then why is the gap?
The employment rate has gone up. The more people working, more people making more money. An auto worker today.
People are not making more
money. Absolutely, they are. You look at $8,000-9,000 profit sharing checks for auto workers. What you think they benefit from the growth in the company?
What's happened over the last 7 years is an exacerbation of what's happened over the last 30, which is that corporate profits and productivity have gone up dramatically, and wages at the low end of the scale have not kept pace. They just have. That's where the gap comes from.
There's not been a dramatic. The economy's grown at about average of under 2% the last 7 years.
That's how much it grows.
If you have growth in the 3 to 4% range, wages go up, employment
why is
go
that
up,
not
demand
true?
for workers go up. We've got a stagnant economy.
So why has that not been true over 30 years?
Because you have. Were you not here in the 90s?
In
the 90s you couldn't hire a worker at McDonald's.
But why have hourly wages?
Workers were in demand.
Why have hourly wages only gone up 7.2% over the last 30 years?
I'm not sure that's true.
It is true.
I think it depends on the
Economic Policy Institute.
On the jobs
just released a report.
You look at jobs that are skilled, that require skills and education, and those people have done very well, are doing very well until we hit this period of stagnation.
I'll send you the report.
I mean, we have had a stagnated economy, and it continues to be so. When you increase demand for workers, worker pay goes up.
It does, but it doesn't keep pace at the bottom end of the scale. That's what the problem has been.
And that's why we stress, I think you do, you've got to get education and skills.
No one's arguing about that.
You've got an economy now that is not going to reward low-skilled workers.
But
those days are done.
But I think one of the things the Pope is saying is that it's not okay to say that people at the low end of that equation who don't have skills, who don't have opportunity to get skills, are just out of luck. And that,
well, they're certainly not out of luck in this country. I mean,
really?
we have a vast social welfare network to take care of them. Do you think?
And you think so? You think poverty is a picnic for people in this country?
No, I don't think he said that.
For anywhere. But what I'm saying is, you cannot cure poverty through either charity or government programs. You've got to cure it through skills
policy
and education. I mean, and people without skills and education are always going to be poor. And that's why we pound so hard.
I think what the Pope is saying is that's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay.
It's reality.
And what he's also saying is that at a time in a country where at the top end things have gotten so good and so big that it's not okay to say that the people at the bottom are just unlucky or unworthy.
We spend about 35 to 40% of our budget on those people and people who are suffering. Those people at the bottom end.
Yeah, well, you know what?
I mean, we spend about, you cannot say that our policies are not.
Our policies are not geared toward letting those people get out of the predicament that they're in.
Well, and there's a lot of reasons our policies aren't working. And
I agree
a lot
with
of it is that government is ineffective. I mean,
it's always government, but not corporations.
Well, I was just going to say, then where's the appetite for change then?
Is corporate in charge of the Detroit Public Schools? How many people, how many children, generations of children have the Detroit Public Schools impoverished?
And how many?
Are corporations in charge of that? Corporations in this town have poured hundreds of millions into those schools for nothing.
But you're talking about, one is government policy,
like
the other corporate policy,
also.
Right. I mean, you're conflating two things.
Ask what are corporations doing about education?
Widening
what are the
the
people
gap,
who are in charge of education
widening the pay gap is as pernicious a problem as underfunding or mismanaging public schools. It's not an either or. Both things are going on. No one's cheering for government saying, well, that's the answer, or they've been performing.
We have wage stagnation in this country because we have job growth stagnation.
We have wage stagnation
because we put in policies that have choked off growth.
We have wage stagnation for many reasons, but the point is we have wage stagnation.
We have no reason why wages aren't going up. If you go to
you don't think corporate policy has anything to do with it?
If you go to West Michigan, it's a different story than it is in Southeast Michigan.
You don't think,
because they have a greater demand for workers.
But you don't think that corporate policy has anything to do with wage stagnation?
No, I don't think.
I mean, that's absurd. That's absurd. Who writes the checks? Nolan? Good grief.
If you have an economy where you have a demand for workers and a demand for skilled workers, wages go up.
But they haven't. That's the whole point.
Because we haven't had that demand.
The whole point is that over 30 years, productivity has grown by 80%.
And in the 90s, wages for everybody soared.
But over 30 years,
we had a demand for workers, and we had an environment in which business was growing.
You got to stop looking at small points on the scale. You got to look at it over time. Over time, productivity has gone up 80%. Wages for hourly workers have only gone up 7.2%.
Between 1918,
why is that true?
Between 1980 and 2013, 2/3 of the billion people who were lifted out of extreme poverty were lifted by economic growth, not government policies.
No one's arguing with that.
Well, you've got to put in place policies that create growth, and we don't have that.
But all right, start to wrap it up. I'm going to ask. This is your last point.
The point is, we had the growth. We didn't have the wage growth.
We haven't had the growth. We've been in stagnant growth.
I just said 80% over 30 years.
You just wasted your last point,
I know.
Stephen.
Good
Here's
grief.
your last point.
We haven't had
I keep saying the same thing. It's just like
we're 2% growth, Steve. I mean,
I know. That's why I'm wrapping you up. Nolan, last point, because you are both starting to repeat your points.
When you have strong economic growth, wages go up. And we haven't had it.
It didn't happen.
And we haven't had it because of anti-growth policies.
And just think of all the great debates that we're having just because the Pope is in town. I'd like to thank my guests, Nolan and Stephen.
He's a little preachy, by the way.
No. I don't think so.
You're just a heathen, that's all.
No. I think he's touching people in I think a very interesting way. And I don't know.
Well, now that's true.
I'm going to be I like watching the reaction of the Pope's visit.
You going to church Sunday because of it?
You know what? I am Catholic. And when I was younger, I did go see John Paul II. Yeah, at the Silverdome.
I remember that.
When I was very young. But I don't know. This Pope is different to me, and
he's very different. Well, he's a Jesuit.
He is different. Well,
will
he's
he
a
bring
Jesuit.
people back
Oh,
to
get
the
off the
church?
Jesuit train.
bring
Will
some
he bring
people
people
back.
back to the church? You know, I don't know. He's already talked about a lot of different reforms which are resonating with Catholics who have maybe fallen off the grid a little bit. He's talking about fast-tracking annulments, which has been a big deal for for separated Catholics for a long time. He said there's going to be a year of forgiveness where, in terms of women want forgiveness for the sin of abortion, that they are forgiven. There are a lot of different things that he's talking about in the Catholic Church, maybe not changing doctrine, but a little bit of different thought that people are relating to, which I think you're really going to see. I think you're going to see a division down the line of the church, unfortunately, between a more conservative and a little bit more leaning, liberal part.
Well, I mean, what he's also, I think, importantly, what he's doing is saying, let's set doctrine aside for a second and talk about the parts of the church that have not gotten a lot of attention in recent years. What's the mission of the church? What's the role of the church in fighting something like poverty? What's the obligation of the church to speak out about these policy issues? And I think that's a more inclusive approach. I mean, for a long time, I think the church was very focused on doctrine. Thou shalt not.
And
that's an important part.
Of the church?
I don't think it is.
I don't think it's a softening of the church, and I think that you would have a lot of Catholics who would push back against that and say that's not what we're looking for, a softening of the church. But I think that there's looking for an understanding of where people are in the world today. When he said, who am I to judge? Talking about gay people. I mean, I think people can relate to that, and I think that that's what people should be hearing from a religious leader. That you've got 1.2 billion Catholics around the world. So I'm very interested in this. I'm fascinated by him, and I know this is the longest web segment known to mankind ever. That started off with bizarre fighting over hourly wages with GM, but it all tied back. This should have been the show, right?
How important is his accessibility?
Well, what do you mean in terms of what?
Well, I mean, he seems to get down and at street level, if you will.
It's a very Jesuit quality.
I think there is something to when people think of the Catholic Church and you think of the Pope shrouded away and away from crowds. And again, you have seen popes in the past who have been very up close and everything. But when you have Pope Francis that came down from the place that he was staying and wanted to pay his overnight bill in Washington and give the donation to the church where he's staying, and he wanted to do it personally himself, and he wants to carry his own bag, and he talks about being with people who are in poverty and meeting them there and helping them rise up. There is something real about that I think people can relate to and say, this guy isn't sitting on a hill behind this golden, the golden gates of the Vatican. He's living in a smaller house. He surrounded by different priests. He's calling out a lot of the clergy that have maybe overspent or done things that haven't been very what he considers to be Christ-like. And I think he is just, again, this is a different shift. And I think it's very interesting that he's taking on this role addressing Congress. I mean, we have not seen that before, but it'll be very interesting to see how lawmakers perceive him.
This was when the Cardinals elected him and elected a Jesuit from the developing world. I think they were sending that signal too. They were saying, this is the face we want to project, that Catholicism is not just about what we lecture each other about or what we pass judgment about, but it is about how we treat each other, how we treat the rest of the world, and how we sort of live out that faith very publicly. I mean, I think for Jesuits that this all seems very familiar. I mean, if you go to a Jesuit institution, this is the kind of. Did you go to a Jesuit institution? I might have spent some time there.
It just seems like
this all seems very familiar.
War with their church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think I wouldn't say at war with their church, but I don't think that the sex scandals that had rocked the Catholic Church. I think that's very hard for people to come back and say, I have trust in what's happening. And I think and Pope Francis is addressing that as well and saying, hey, we know you're hurt. We know that this was an abominable time in our history, and we are going to make darn sure that this does not happen again. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. Gosh, what is this, like a 20-minute web segment? The control room, you're killing us right now, right? All right, hey, that's MiWeek After the Show. All right, give us the hook, we're out.